Hi, welcome to Chapter 17. Chapter 17 is kind of a really neat new feature that CSS allows us to do, and it's called Flexbox. And in the past, we've been using floats, and now we're going to introduce you to Flexbox, which makes those types of things easier, especially with responsive web design. And so it talks about some of the different features and how they kind of relate or how they kind of work as the same as the different floats. So really there's what we call a flex container, and we usually use some kind of a div tag or some kind of a different tag to introduce that in there, whether it's inline or external style sheet, whatever the case may be. So we have these flex items. So here, this is Flexbox at its most basic format. We just say display flex. Okay. Now, since it is not accepted across the board by all browsers, we do have to use a WebKit. I think that's for Safari. We have to do a display WebKit flex, and then we can do display flex, and that should handle all of the different browsers that are out there today. Then we get into the different parameters within the flex. Okay, so let's go. I'm going to switch over here to the WSS3 school, and so here's what we've got. So we basically have three properties. We have what is called flex grow, flex shrink, and this thing called flex basic. So if we say flex flow, this is a number specifying how much the item will grow relative to the rest of the flexible items. So depending on how many other flexible items you have, this will basically grow in retrospect to them. If one is a 1, one is a 2, the 2 will grow basically larger than the 1. Okay, those types of things. We'll get more in detail on that. And shrink basically the same way. As you shrink an item, how does it shrink compared to the other flex item that's in there? We also have auto. It just basically does it automatically, so it can so when we basically do a shrink and a grow compared to the other ones, it does it automatically. Initial, if you read up on the initial, that is basically set it to the defaults. Okay, we have none and we have inherit. So if you said 0, 0 flex, that means it's not allowed to grow, it's not allowed to shrink. If you have 0, 1, that means it's not allowed to grow, but it's allowed to shrink. Inherit says it inherits from the parent element. So if there's a parent flex and we say inherit, it's going to basically grab everything that the parent has. So if we have a flex instead of a flex, so we have a parent-child relationship, if I say inherit, it's going to grab everything that the parent has. Okay, so that's kind of the basics for setting this up. Let's see how it actually works in a real situation. So we can actually do flex rows and columns. So here is a flex row, flex, 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 and here's a column, flex, flex, flex. Notice this first one is a little skinnier than the other two. Looks like maybe that third one may be a little skinnier. So again, as you can see, we can set it up so that they have different widths and those types of things. Another thing you notice is, hey, there's no spacing between them. Well, we can actually have some parameters. We can force them to have spacing between them. Okay, so we have different flex properties that we can deal with. So, so here's our flex. We can also do what's called a flex flow column wrap. So it will basically wrap each column so it says by the time you read this, flexor print may longer be required. So what they're saying is we may no longer need. So as of the writing of this document, the WebKits were needed. What they're saying here is they may not be needed. Okay, so flex flow flex items by default are placed side by side, as in a row. In addition, a browser may display those flex items in a single row without wrapping. In other words, no matter how narrow you make the browser, it will keep those side by side without dropping one below the other. Okay, so we can do a flex flow property. Allows you to control both the direction in which the items are displayed, whether or not they wrap onto the next line. Okay, so we can say row. I want them to appear as rows. I can say row reversed. We'll display the flex items side by side, but reverse the order of them. So if you have 1, 2, 3, they'll display as 3, 2, 1. I can display them as columns. So if I say flex flow column, it will display them in columns and not rows. Row reverse or column reverse, same exact thing as the other one. I can say no wrap. This is a normal behavior of the flex items within the container. The browser will keep the items in the same row no matter how narrow the browser window. Wrap, if it doesn't fit, now this is where the responsive comes into play. If I say wrap, if you shrink it down too far, it will wrap down to the next line. So that's probably the best thing to have. And wrap reverse does just like the others. If it wraps, it automatically puts the items in reverse order. I can do row wrap. I can just say wrap. So here is a flex container. Here's display flex, the flex flow wrap. Here's 1, here's 2, here's 3. Here's row reverse. 3 automatically pops up before 1 and 2. So we could do the row reverse as well if that's important. We can justify the content, determines whether the browser should place the flex items within a row. A flex start aligns the items in the left of the row. So right here, if I say flex start, it starts from right here on the left-hand side and goes over to the right-hand side. Flex end aligns them at the end, and basically, so again, our gaps will be on the right side of the flex start, flex end. Again, it seems like everything's shifted to the right. And then space around evenly distributes any spacing left over. So when you set your flexes up at a certain spacing, it says I'm going to consider the entire spacing and divide the spacing up evenly between both sides. Which is oh, that's flex center. So flex center does what number 3 is. Flex space around does just that. It evenly spaces it around. Or space between. I'm sorry, space between. That's number 4. So you notice how automatically puts the correct spacing between the 3 items. But it doesn't take into consideration the outside edges. 5, on the other hand, where it says space around, evenly distributes the space here, 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 and here. Now notice this looks twice the size of that, and it is, because there's that much space around that box, and there's that much space around the box. And again, there's that much space around that box, that box, that box, that box. And what's nice is we just plug those parameters in, and it automatically does it for us. Flex start aligns the tops of all the items to the top of the container. Flex end aligns the bottoms. Center aligns and vertical. So if you're dealing with the alignments, then the center basically centers them vertically. Baseline basically says if you've got a title on here, I'm going to align those items. And stretch will stretch all of the items to make sure that they fit vertically. Okay, so stretch is probably one I would lean towards because I think it would look best all the same size as opposed to 3 different sizes. Okay. I wanted to kind of go through these things kind of very fast, and then we'll go through the tutorial and really slow it down so that you can kind of see how they work. Align the content. The last property that we have is the alignment, so the align content. So let me back up. This one was the align items. We have flex start, flex end, center, baseline, and stretch. Down here we have what is called the align items property. I'm sorry, align content property, and there we have flex start, flex end, center, space between, space around, stretch. So here is the flex start, everything to the left. Flex end, they basically go to the very end, which is the bottom of the page. So notice everything's aligned to the top, aligned to the bottom. 3 is center, so they're vertically centered. 4 is space between. 5 is space around, and 6 is stretch. Again, so that's more vertical. So our order property, we can actually give each item a number, and then we can say put them in that particular order. So if I were to give a flex item, a 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then I say I want this one to basically go first. So if the number 3, number 3 I put a 1, and the number 4 I put a 2, and the number 2 I put a 3, and the number 1 I put a 4, they would display as 3, 4, 2, 1. And you just say order. So you got order 1, order 2, order 3, so on and so forth. You might want to move it, force it to the left. You can use negative numbers at that point. Align self works just like the align items used for containers. However, where align items applies to all flex items, the align self only applies to each individual item. So this is where we can use those same properties with the align items. So all the things are in align items. We do align self, but we can do it each specifically for those each individual flex items. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into the tutorial. Oh, one thing. I want to talk about this real quick. So we kind of have to sometimes do some math, and so if we look down here. So in this particular case, I have, instead of using one of those auto, initial, and those type, I can actually say I want this to be this many pixels wide. So I said I have my flex 1 and 1, which means let the first one grow in relative to the other ones and let it have a 1 position. This one says grow 3, so it's going to be bigger, 3 times bigger. It lets it shrink by 1, and it's going to have a width of 200 pixels, and we got let it grow 4 times as the other. Again, let's shrink by 1, and then it's 100 pixels wide. So let's say we have a container width of 1,000. Okay, so I come down here, so this is 1,000 pixels wide. So I've set this up for 300 pixels, but I got to look at the other one. So think of it this way. Each one of these guys is, okay, so I've got 300 pixels plus 1 times 50. So where did the 50 come from? Well, it says that, let's just kind of start at the beginning here. So the flex basis values of 300, 200, 100. So that's 3, 6, and 100. So here's the 300, the 200, the 100. That equals 600. So if I take the 1,000 and subtract the 600, I have 400 left over. Okay? And it says that now what I do is I take these numbers, I take 1 and 3 and 4 and add those together, I have 8. And so I take the 400 and I divide by 8. So now I've got 50. So each one of these ones here is going to represent how many pixels? They're going to represent 50 pixels. How do I know that? Well, I take the 300, the 200, the 100, subtract that from the 1,000, leaves 400. I then take this 1, 3, and 4, add those together, that's 8. I take that 400, divide by 8, that's 50 for each one of these ones. So this first box is 350 pixels. So how is that? 300 plus 1 times 50. It's 350. I take 3 times 50, which is 150. I add that to the 200. There's 350 pixels. I take the 4 times the 50. That's 200. I'm sorry, 4 times 50 is 200. And I add it to the 1. I'm sorry, is that right? Yeah, 200. And I add it to the 100, and that's 300. So this last box is 300 pixels. So if I got 350 and 350, that's 700. I add 300 more, that's 1,000. Okay? So this is what it would look like if I had flex 1, 1, 400, 1, 1, 400, 100, 400, row, no wrap. There's how it works. Here is flex 1, 1, 1, 4, 1, 4, and they're all 400, but if they start to shrink, they will basically, okay, if I shrink the screen, it will basically keep this one 1 as relative. This will shrink 4 times more and 4 times more as well. So notice these two boxes get smaller than that one. These are 0, 0, 0. That means they will not shrink. So if the screen shrinks, notice how it would truncate this last section off. So that second 0 is very important for reducing the size of your screen. Okay, so let's just get right into the okay, oh, did I go too far? Where is that tutorial? Okay, so we're going to build a flex box layout. So currently here's what we have. If I open up this flex box layout, double click on it. It's opening. This is what it looks like. Okay, it looks okay. Not real happy about the navigation buttons. They don't look so hot, but it's usable. But let's get some Flexbox going on in here, and let's get things kind of working. Okay, so we're going to open up the Flexbox layout custom CSS, and we are going now. If we open that up, the custom CSS looks like this. Nothing's in there. Okay, so if we look at the HTML, we can see that we do have the base CSS, which is have all the base things that we've seen in the past, and then we got the custom, which has nothing in it right now. We've got a class header, section, nav. Here's action. Here's info, section, section box, section and boxes, footer and section. So it's got two different classes for each one of those guys. So let me go back over to custom. So let's. So here we're going to do. Now, very important, notice it's got commas. That says these styles are going to apply these separate classes. So these three classes are going to have all these styles. If I didn't have the commas, that says the footer inside of boxes, inside of nav, that's what it applies to. No, this has got commas, so it's going to apply to all three. So we're going to have a .nav, .boxes, .footer is going to have a display WebKit flex, display flex, flex row, no wrap, flex flow, row, and wrap. Okay. Or sorry, row and wrap. I thought it's not no wrap. So row and wrap and row and wrap. So it's going to be in rows and it's going to wrap, meaning if it shrinks, as it shrinks, push it down to the next size. So I grab those, throw them in here. If I do a save and if we take a look at it, I don't know how much is going to change. Yeah, nothing's really changing as of yet because we're not really getting in, we haven't really applied any of those flex items. We said this is what we want our flex to look like. We haven't applied them to any of our, we haven't put the flex items in there. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to put space between them. So justify the content by making sure we have space between them. Now that says don't worry about the edges, just worry about the space between the actual items. So I put it, so all of our .navs, this is only for the navs. So if we look at our nav bar up here, notice that our nav has no spacing. So that's one of the things it did. It took away all the spacing between there. So now we're going to put some evenly spaced items in there. So when I do a refresh, look how it, now it took it from this edge to that edge and spaced it evenly. Okay. Now it looks like it did take in consideration over here, but realize the container starts here and ends here. Okay, so it didn't take those white space on the side because those are outside of the container that we are currently in. We're going to change the any anchor tags within the navs. We're going to change them to a width of 23%. So that should evenly size those buttons. So there's our anchor tags within the nav. Change it 23%. Do a refresh. So evenly spaced each button. So each button is now the same size, and they each have the same spacing between them. Okay. So now we're going to change those three columns. So we got boxes, div, so any div tags inside of the box class, we want to change it to a flex 11250. Okay, so we want them to each grow and shrink relative to each other and make sure they're 250 pixels wide each. And those, let me copy this and let me copy and paste. And so these are the boxes. So any div tags inside the box. So right here, so here's boxes. Is that boxes? Whoop. Boxes, okay. So here's boxes, and here is a div tag, div tag, div tag. So it's going to apply to each one of those div tags. So if I come over here and refresh, we should see columns now, correct? Yes. Notice though, no spacing. They're not justified. So we got columns, but not real pretty. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a margin of 10 pixels. We're going to border radius, which means we're going to round the corners. And we're going to change the background. And we're going to have padding of 10, 10. So top 10, right 10, bottom 0, left 10. So let's take a look, see what that does. Okay, so it makes nice gray boxes around each of these guys. They're all the same height. Nice rounded corners. And did we evenly space them? How did that work? Oh, the margins did that. Okay, so there's the margins 10. But we could have taken care of that with that space evenly parameter for the flex as well. They decided to use a margin. And then the padding, again, remember margins on the outside, padding's on the inside. And we change the background color to that gray with just a slight transparency, 10% transparency. Okay, so we're going to add 4 more lines to the code to display the WebKit flex. We're going to make it flex. We're going to make them columns, and we're going to have the columns flex flow as a column. So let's see what that does for us. Really didn't change anything. I didn't think it would. So this defines the decks as flex containers, and it sets the flow direction of the flex to column. This which stacks the column and buttons on top of each other. You may be saying to yourself, hey, we've already stacked them on top of each other. Why do we need to do that? Flex items can take advantage of auto margins, so you can force those buttons to the bottom of each div. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, let's grab this. So the more class inside of the boxes is going to have a margin top of auto, which basically forces that guy to the bottom. So I'm thinking the more is the actual buttons at the bottom of each of those boxes, and it's going to push those to the very bottom of the page, or I'm sorry, bottom of that container that they're in. So let me come over here and look at the index, and let's see. Yep, class button. So there's the class button. I'm sorry, boxes. Where's boxes? Class more. I don't see boxes. Oh, here it is, boxes. Okay. Oh, here's the more. Okay, my bad. So this is the paragraph. So this more inside of boxes, so there's boxes. So each of those div tags is a section and a box, and the more is wrapped around those buttons. That is what basically is going to then have the auto top, the top margin of auto push. It's going to push it to the bottom of the box container. Okay, so let's watch that happen, and kaboom. So now all three of those buttons appear at the bottom of each box container. We're going to format the footer. So the copyright class inside of the footer class is going to be a 2, 1, and 500, and the margin right is going to be 30 pixels, and the sign up inside of the footer is going to be a 1, 1, 250, and it's compared to the sign up on the copyright. So when we grow the copyright, when the screen grows, the copyright will have more room than a sign up. So again, how large is the footer? It's got padding. Okay. How wide is the footer? All right, let's just copy this. And since we're not doing a column section, it's going to probably make them in rows, is what I'm guessing. So we come down here, we have our, so here's our footer, here's our copyright, and here's our sign up. So it should probably put them in a row. So right now they're basically, yeah. So let me refresh. No, I'm sorry, it defaults to columns. Okay, so I went ahead and put them as columns. And notice this side's bigger than that side because we did 2 and a 1. Okay, then it wants us to, okay, so all of the navs, boxes, footers, and the forms inside the footers are going to be a flex, and they're going to be in a row, and they're going to wrap. So when they get smaller, they will automatically wrap. It says this selection makes the form inside the box, this form, a flex container, and turns the label of the text field and the button inside the form text items. So it takes these two guys and makes sure they're as a row. That's really one of the main things it's doing there. So there's our row wrap. And since they're flex, it's going to butt them up against each other with no spacing. So watch these two buttons down here. Move me out of the way. Boom. So that's basically, notice they're rounded still though. So let's kind of get rid of those rounded corners. I think they're going to have us get rid of those rounded corners. To add a style to the end of the custom, you turn the form of flex container set to wrap, setting the width of the label. So in this rule, 100% forces the two input fields to wrap to another row. However, the text field of the button are not side by side. Okay, so let's do this. And we take a look, see what that does. Didn't do anything. But it's setting up this container down here. And then we're going to change the input of type email within the signup class. We're going to change it to flex 1. We want the border radius to be 4004. These two zeros are going to get rid of those two rounded corners. And then the submit button, the radius is going to be 0, 4, 4, 0, so that those zeros are going to basically get rid of the, so one's going to get rid of the rounded corners on the inside or to the right side, and the second one is going to remove the rounded corners to the left side. So they will be butted up against each other with no space, and it looks like one flowing item. So we add that. So if you come down here, if we watch those two rounded corners here on the inside, when I refresh, they will go away, and now it looks like one flowing item. I did widen that one a little bit, and that's probably due to the that width 100%, and then the web flex 1. Okay. So we're going to add, it looks like if our max width is 500, meaning we get small, we make the screen smaller, we're going to change the nav to a flex column, and we're going to make the width of the anchor tags within the nav 100%, and we're going to make the bottom margin 2%. So when I add this, you can see that it's only for that smaller media. So if I come out here and do a refresh, we'll see no changes. Okay, we saw no changes to nav. But if I resize my screen, watch the nav bars when they get to a certain point. Notice how they're now stacked on top of each other. So that's kind of neat. So we said when it gets lower than 500 pixels, we want them to turn into a column as opposed to rows. We want the width to be 100%, 100% of the container that they're currently in, and then make the bottom margin 2%, so that we do have a little bit of a margin here between this and the next item. Now you notice it looks like there's a pretty good sized gap in there. This text probably has a top margin. Notice what our boxes did as well, is they stacked on top of each other. And notice how they work. Very, very web responsive. Very responsive. Up here in this nav bar, I think they were setting up the nav to something. Let's see if I can find it. Here it is. So if I open up this guy, it's got these three buttons across the top. Notice About Us is right there like that. And so the very first value we want to apply to the flex is we're going to change a container to just change it to a flex. We're going to change a div tag inside of the container class to a flex 1. And so since all three divs have the same value, they will be the same width to each other. Okay, so I add this. To the base. So I add this right here. So the container is a web flex, or I'm sorry, display flex, and the div inside there is a flex 1. So when I save it and do a refresh, we don't see much of a change yet, but it made sure each of these guys is the same width. Okay, so if I put that over here, did they put that inside there? But they might have just done it inside of the yeah, so here they put the banner flex end, so make sure that we put it to the right side, and then make the auto margin to the right auto for the logo, which basically says push it all the way to the left. Now when I refresh this, and I don't see the change. Why not? Did I put it in the right spot? Now, let me do this. So I'm going to put that down here in this guy, and let's see what happens. That should, yeah. So push this logo. Now again, we're inside of a container. So the container ends here and ends over here. So push this guy to the left, these guys to the right, and so now they're evenly spaced. Life looks good. Okay. So Flexbox, it's a lot. It's different, but it really makes responsive and makes your website flow and make sure we keep things in perspective to each other. And it basically is a great way to have our columns automatically, when they shrink, wrap around and flow. And that's very, very important to responsive web design. Okay, if you have any questions, give me a call.